To see a murder like this, it opened my eyes into what kind of evil really can be in this world.
Now, investigators say they found the remains of Lisa and Joel Guy Sr. The couple had been stabbed and dismembered. Their remains were found throughout the house in a homemade solution.
Police Department, Sheriff's Office!
Horrifying to think the quiet neighborhood where everyone waves at each other and willing to help each other, this can happen on our street. It's just hard to believe that can happen.
And they loved him. They loved him so much. They loved all of us.
I hope I never have to cover a case as gruesome as this, just simply because why? Human beings should not do these kinds of horrific things to each other.
Just days after Thanksgiving in 2016, a gruesome discovery inside a West Knox County home. A couple found murdered and dismembered. Investigators say they had never seen anything like it. Days later, that couple's son, Joel Guy Jr., was arrested, brought from Louisiana back to Knox County. Now, in this episode of Behind the Headline, we take a closer look at this investigation. We go into the courtroom to hear the chilling information that came out from witnesses and from loved ones. Our coverage started on November 30th, 2016, with this report from then WBIR anchor and reporter Kendall Morris.
Investigators say they received phone calls on Monday from people who work with Lisa Guy asking them to check on her. Investigators later came to the house here on Golden View Lane to check on Lisa Guy and Joel Guy Sr., only to find what is being described as a gruesome crime scene inside. Now, investigators say they found the remains of Lisa and Joel Guy Sr. The couple had been stabbed and dismembered. Their remains were found throughout the house in a homemade solution that is an acid-based solution consisting of things like bleach, sewer cleaner, and hydrogen peroxide. Investigators say killings like this are in the 1 percentile of homicides in the U.S. involving mutilation or dismemberment.
It would be described as horrific, a very gruesome crime scene. It's not something we run across. Like I say, usually there's a motivation behind it. In this case, we just don't know what that is.
Investigators say they don't know the motive behind the killing at this time. However, they did say that the parents were going to have a financial discussion with their son about cutting him off while he was home over Thanksgiving. Joel Guy Jr. was taken into custody yesterday in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That was where he was in college. Officials say they expect to bring him back to Knox County in the next few days. Now, we spoke to neighbors here on Golden View Lane. They say it is a very quiet street. We'll have their reaction to this news coming up on 10 News at 6. Back to you.
One of the journalists who covered this horrific, gruesome crime is now WBIR investigative producer John North. John, you've been with us many times to talk about many stories that you have covered while you've been here at WBIR, also a longtime reporter at the News Sentinel. Let's talk about the Joel Guy case. In your body of work over the years, where does this land?
Well, it's certainly one of the most horrific. For multiple reasons. I mean, anytime you're covering a case where somebody kills a family member, that's truly horrific. But the manner in which this was done, cutting up their bodies in such a deliberate manner, is really awful. Another aspect of this case, and then the other thing is that it was all planned, and then it was taking place. The trial itself took place during one of the most miserable eras of our lives. Most recently, people will remember COVID. And the other thing that sticks out about this case, which I know we're going to get into, is the day that the victims were discovered, because that day, which was Monday the 28th of November, the first Monday after Thanksgiving, was literally one of the worst days in East Tennessee history for East Tennessee, not because of this case.
Let's talk about that. That is the best place to start. On that day, that Monday after Thanksgiving, something huge happened in East Tennessee and the days thereafter that consumed our airtime. Not this as much as this. Let's talk about what played out.
Right.
John.
Literally and figuratively, it consumed everybody. And that was that a fire had broken out the day before Thanksgiving in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. At a remote spot. And we knew about that fire. We'd been paying attention to it for several days, but weather conditions dramatically changed over the weekend, going from Sunday into Monday. We suddenly had a really bad storm move in. It was high winds, 70 to 80 miles an hour. We had, and it just swept the fire from that remote spot in the park at Chimney Tops all the way down into Gatlinburg. And by Monday, by lunchtime Monday the 28th, is when the fire really started to take command and threaten Gatlinburg and other areas. So that is what most of us were thinking about. We had a reporter down there, Leslie Ackerson, and we were trying to focus on that all that afternoon. Even though we were aware the fire was approaching, we still didn't conceive how bad that was going to be.
The day, I remember that day clearly. I actually was not working that day. I was off that day watching the news from home and just remembered the skies over Sevier County were yellow from the smoke. And it just, you knew something bad was about to happen. And indeed, yes, these wildfires consumed parts of Sevier County, and it made its way down into Gatlinburg, 14 people in the end killed. So this is playing out. We have a lot of resources in Sevier County covering this and the days after. But on this day as well, then we get word of another horrific scene that played out. How did this come to our newsroom? How did we know, oh, this is not a good situation, we need to get to West Knox County?
So like you say, everybody was sort of focused on, okay, what do we need to do about the fire that's approaching? I think I came into work around 3 o'clock on that afternoon because I was working night side as the EP with our good friend Tom Barkley, who is with us in this room right now. And the phone rang. She may have called me, or I may have just picked up the phone in the newsroom, but it was somebody from the sheriff's office inquiring, were we going to be coming out to this scene out west north of I-40 on Golden View Lane? And I was like, we are really slammed trying to deal with what's coming with the fire down in Sevier County. And she sort of said, okay. And I thought, I guess we better do something. If that's kind of a sign that you need to respond, that something's up. And so I think we sent somebody. But again, we were also focused on what was coming and what was already hitting Gatlinburg, and the fact that embers were now drifting down on downtown Gatlinburg, that was truly our focus. And just getting somebody out to this house, what turned out to be the Guy house, was unfortunately sort of an afterthought, and let's make do with what we can get.
Yes, on any given day, once we found out what was happening, that a couple murdered and dismembered, that would have been the lead story of the day, but it was buried in our newscast.
Yeah,
once we realized what was going on.
We do TV shows in blocks of time, and this was not in your lead block of time, which is your 8 block. I think somebody reminded me this was like in the B or the C block, what we were able to get, and that probably wasn't nearly as much. It certainly wasn't as much as it deserved, but I doubt it was as much as what we could get in. We just couldn't get in very much.
When did we start realizing the nature of what played out? Was it fairly soon after, based on Kendall's report? It seemed like we had pretty good indication, yes, a really bad situation played out in that house in the early hours.
By Tuesday, Wednesday, that's when you really begin to get a sense that this is going to be very bad and you need to get ready because it's going to involve things like dismemberment, and there's another family member involved. And also I think it was by the 30th, the son, Joel Guy Jr., had been taken into custody down in Louisiana.
Let's talk about that, the family dynamic, if you will. Mom, dad, living in West Knox County. The son had been home for Thanksgiving, correct?
That's
but then
right.
went back to Louisiana, where apparently he was in school.
Joel Guy Jr. Lived in Baton Rouge and went off and on to school at LSU, and he'd been doing that for a while, completely under the support of his mom. He didn't work, and I don't know that he ever really had a job, ever. And by 2016, he was about 28 years old. He was very happy to sort of live in Baton Rouge in an apartment, cocooned away from everybody, had some contact with his mom, not a whole lot of contact with anybody else. would come back for holidays like Thanksgiving. And as you mentioned, he drove back to Knoxville from Baton Rouge, I think, and got into town on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. So he was there for Thanksgiving. What we didn't know at the time was that he had been planning for at least a couple weeks to carry out these two murders. This was all something that he had been thinking about for a long time. And the reason was that the guys, Joel Sr. and Lisa, wanted to retire. You saw in Kendall's package there was a Century 21 sign in the yard. That house was under contract. That was going to be sold. The guys were getting ready to leave that house because they wanted to move back to where Mr. Guy Sr. Had once lived. That was in Sirgoinsville, and he was going to buy the old family house. That was the plan. And so they told Joel Jr., we're going to cut you off. We can't pay you any more money. We're going to have to cut you off. That's just the way it's going to have to be. Dad's retiring. Mom's going to retiring. The day Lisa Guy was found, some of her coworkers were supposed to be taking her out to lunch as kind of a goodbye lunch. That week was her last week to work at Jacobs Engineering. That was going to be it. And so his time was running out if he, in his mind, wanted to execute this essentially diabolical plan. He had little time. He had to do it. And so he made all these plans. He bought chemicals. He bought equipment down in Louisiana, multiple big box stores down there, and drove them all up here as part of his scheme to murder his parents.
Yeah, we would learn through testimony. He pretty much had a playbook here going on
He
to
did.
carry this out.
Yeah, we would discover through the trial, as you mentioned, it would come out that he brought a notebook with him, a backpack with him that had various books, but he also had a notebook in there in which he had handwritten sort of a checklist, if you will, all the things that he needed to do if he was going to execute this plan. And he wrote it out because it got into the trial. Get killing knives, get carving knives, bring blender, grind meat, get plastic bins. Does not matter where they are killed, just get rid of bloody spots. It went on and on and on like that. He'd written all of that out ahead of time. That was part of his plan. It was extraordinary. I'd never seen anything like that. I mean, you know, people who want to commit horrible acts, they will sometimes sort of jot their thoughts down. But he, in more than 2 pages, had sort of laid it out.
And once again, I keep going back to this. In addition to this playing out in the early days, we have this horrific fire playing out in the Smokies. Typically, there would be a lot of concern, people distressed over this, upset over this. Do you recount a lot of reaction from the public, given what was also playing out at that time? I don't as much because so much of my time at that point was spent up in the Smokies covering that. Do you recall what the talk was back here?
I don't think there was a whole lot, again, because our focus was so much on once the wildfires hit Gatlinburg and the surrounding areas that night, the night of the 28th, and caused so much destruction and killed, as you said, 14 people, more than $1 billion. Everybody was all hands on deck. Literally, as folks watching or listening us may realize, when a big event happens, we go big, and we are all hands on deck, and we make a plan, and that's what we stick with. And that's what we were doing that week and even into the next week after the fires hit. So I think maybe when one had an occasion to talk a little about it, there was sort of a dark horror about what we were learning about what happened out on Golden View, but that was about it.
Do you recall law enforcement being very forthcoming with information during this time in these early days? Granted, we heard that press conference and they said it was gruesome, it was horrific, but did they share any more details, graphic details up to that point, or did they hold it close to the vest knowing this was going to likely end up in trial?
My recollection is that it's something big like this, it's so horrible. 2 things happen. One, they tend to hold stuff very close, but you also tend to begin to pick up details, even if they're not going to say them publicly, that things are really bad. So, and we experienced this with the Christian Newsom murders, which is another behind the headline, which we've talked about. This was another one of those where it's like the facts are so disturbing. It's human nature to want to share this kind of information. So we heard things that were leaked out about, and I hate to be grim, but this is just the nature of what we're talking about here. The fact that they had been dismembered, and the fact that there were tubs that he had used and put the body parts in the tubs with chemicals to disintegrate the bodies. And then we had even heard, as I recall, something to the effect of that Lisa Guy's head had been found in a cooking pot on the stove, which proved to be true.
Yeah. So this is happening late 2016. Where does it go between then and eventually when it does go to trial?
So Joel Guy was taken into custody, like I mentioned, pretty quickly down in Baton Rouge by, I think, November the 30th, brought back and held in custody. And the case is kind of winding its way through the judicial system. Considering the nature of it, it was one that both the prosecution and the defense wanted to proceed with carefully. We were kind of waiting to see whether the DA was going to seek death in this case. Once upon a time, and we've talked about some of these cases in this podcast, this would have been the kind of case that you would have been like, oh yeah, the state is going to seek death in this case. But they ultimately declined to. They decided not to. Because the thinking was, well, he's potentially looking at life without the possibility of parole. So they were good to go with that. But then something happened which sort of got in the way, and that was in the early months of 2020, all of us in the United States experienced the COVID outbreak, and that became another sort of difficulty in trying to prosecute this case and get it going because society shut down for many, many months. Courts, everything shut down. I mean, everything shut down. And they had to figure out how can we continue to function as a society, but also try to avoid giving each other this virus which can kill you.
And it took a time. We paused life, it felt like, for a while. But in time, life continued. The courts reopened and cases were set to be heard. And as far as Joe Guy's case, it was heard in 2020. Our crew was there the first day of testimony. Let's take a listen to Yvonne Cooper. She was our reporter at that time, and this is her report.
Police Department, Sheriff's Office!
This body camera footage shows detectives arriving at a home on Golden View Lane with a bloody crime scene inside.
County Sheriff's Office!
Joel Guy Sr. and Lisa Guy were stabbed and dismembered inside of their home. This was the couple 4 days earlier on Thanksgiving with their grandchildren and their son, Joel Guy Jr., who is now on trial for their murder.
Yes, it is.
On day one of the trial, Joel Guy Sr.'s daughters and sisters took the stand.
We were very close, like friends, like best friends. They were my best friend.
They just fit, you know. They were meant to be together.
The Guys were married for 31 years. Family members say the Guys told them the couple was ready to retire and could no longer financially support their son, Joel Jr.
Dad and I were talking out in the garage, and she had stated that they were going to retire, and it was time for Joe Michael to stand on his own 2 feet. He was an adult.
Joel Guy Jr. was 28 years old and a college student living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. His half-sisters say they didn't really know him. Prosecutors presented another piece of evidence during the opening statements. This notebook. Investigators found it at the crime scene. Prosecutors allege that it belonged to Guy Jr., and he documented how he would carry out the crime. Some of the entries were read aloud in court. Get knives, get sledgehammer, crush bones, get rid of bodies inside the house, their DNA, my DNA in the house.
Yvonne Cooper reporting, and I am happy to share that Yvonne Cooper is with us now. Yvonne, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. You are now at WATN in Memphis, have been there several years as the morning anchor, correct?
That is correct. Hey, Robin, John, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being with us, because I know this had to be, as far as the body of work that you did here in Knoxville, a story that had an impact on you. Let's talk about it. You have been a journalist for a long time as well. The same question I asked John. Covering a story like this, where does it rank in the stories that you covered as far as the magnitude, the heaviness, the gruesomeness of it, if you will?
Yeah. I have been a journalist now for almost a decade. I am 32 years old, and I have never in my life heard of a story like this. And in many ways, I hope I never will again. It was that gruesome. It was that horrific, unimaginable that a person could do this to anyone, let alone a son do this to his namesake and his mother. This story could really, really change a person. And in some ways, it really did change how I did work as a journalist and how I viewed the world. It was that heavy.
Okay, let's talk about that. How did that change you as a journalist?
As a journalist, it really opened my eyes. I had covered some tough cases before. In the world of news, you're constantly covering crime, politics, a lot of different things. But to see a murder like this, it opened my eyes into what kind of evil really can be in this world. And I was a young girl at the time that was not accustomed to being in an environment where you heard about something as horrific as this. And so as a journalist, it really taught me how to detach, because there were some moments during that trial where you could not make it about you and your feelings and what you thought or what you felt. You just needed to stick to the facts of the case to just make it through that day, to make sure you were giving a report that was accurate, that was unbiased, because he was at the time innocent until proven guilty. And so you had to keep your emotions in check. So it really gave me a great lesson in that.
No doubt about that. Let's go back to 2020. The trial is beginning. How did you end up covering this story? Was it assigned to you? Was it a story that you had picked up in between him being, or now you were not with us in 2016, but of course this is a story you learn about very quickly once you get here. How did you end up covering this story in the trial?
Well, that's a very great question. So here's what happened. I was an eager reporter at WBIR, as many of you, I'm sure, remember. And I just wanted to be in any big story that I could. And so I started going around the newsroom trying to make sure that everybody knew that I loved covering court cases, which I still do to this day. And I'm like, the juicier the court case, the better. Because it's really the only time almost in the industry where you can just listen to both sides of an argument, and sometimes it can just feel like a gossip session in court. I know that sounds a little weird, but in my mind, when I'm taking notes and I'm going through details about different facts and looking at the evidence that's presented, it feels very gossipy to me in a normal case. And so our assistant news director at the time, Allison Duff, kind of remembered that I had been doing a little campaign around the newsroom, trying to get into a good court case. And she says, I think I may have something for you. It will be a major case that you will cover, but it is in no means a good case. And I'm like, that just piqued my interest even more. I'm like, okay, what is this? What are you talking about? She said, I want you to go look up Joel Guy Jr. and then come back to me with an answer. You can choose yes or no. And I still chose yes, even after seeing what he was accused of doing, because I knew I needed the experience to be not even in the courtroom, because I knew at the time I couldn't go into the courtroom, but to be a reporter on the front lines of that story that meant so much to so many people that had waited 4 years to go to trial. It was important for me to make sure that we saw the story through. Okay,
so, and let me make a point. At this point in time, COVID was well underway, and as we saw from your report, you were wearing masks. You had to wear masks, but you could not go into the courtroom. How did this work? Because John, you were also in the courtroom. You were wearing a mask.
Yeah, well, courtroom access obviously was limited because everybody had to be spaced.
Yes, right.
The family of the victims sat together on the left-hand side of the courtroom, but everybody was spread out. Even jurors were spread out. And as you said, I was sitting in sort of, I was in a different section than the family, but I sat and wore a mask for the whole time, and I didn't have many people around me. It just had to be that way. One of the good things, though, if you had monitors, and I think Court TV covered this case as well, if you had monitors, then you didn't necessarily have to be in the courtroom. True. And I think, Yvonne, you had that benefit at least. You could be watching it from a monitor, I think, outside, right? Which probably was a little bit better.
That is correct.
Yeah. But, I mean, it was such a weird time. I've covered many trials, and that's the first one where I had ever had to wear a mask and sit there and try and take notes and concentrate and listen, and things were muffled. And, you know, the district attorney who was prosecuting the case, she's wearing a mask. The defense
probably at times made it hard to hear.
It was
testimony.
It was, yeah. And the defense attorneys were wearing masks, and that's just, you know. But at first, in the summer of 2020, everybody's like, "Can we even do this? Can we actually even pull this off?" There was some doubt because defense attorneys, especially, are properly concerned about making sure that their client gets a fair case. Well, if you suddenly throw a mask into the equation, is your person going to be able to hear everything? Is the jury going to be able to hear everything? Can the court hear everything? So all these things became big question marks. But the decision was made in late September of 2020. Let's go. Let's do it.
Okay, so the case is underway in the courtroom. Let's talk about the demeanor of the courtroom, and specifically Joel Guy as he sits at the defense table. Do you recall, Yvonne, what you could gain from his body movements? He at different times he wore almost a plastic screen over his face. So could you see then his reaction to things? What was his reaction?
That is a great question. You could see him because of just that clear screen that was over his face. He never actually wore a physical mask where you couldn't see any facial expressions. But to be honest with you, Robin, he really didn't make many facial expressions at all. He was extremely stoic throughout the entire trial. At some points, he would look up, look at different monitors, almost like he was, in some ways, looking at his own work, almost like he was enamored with what they were saying that he did or what he actually did. There was only one time, and John North will tell you, that you saw any kind of emotion out of Joel Guy Jr. It wasn't when his sisters were on the stand testifying and crying and sobbing. It wasn't during the victim impact statements. It was only when his former roommate, Michael McCracken, was asked to take the stand. And Joel Guy Jr., when he heard his name, turned around in his chair, literally did an about face, and kept his eyes on that young man as he walked up to the witness stand and sat down and testified. They played some audio from jail from their last phone call, kept his eyes glued to him. Not a smirk, not a smile, but that was the most emotion that we could see out of him during that whole trial, was that young man.
You recall
that?
Yeah,
no, Yvonne is absolutely 100% right. It was fascinating because he hardly reflected any emotion, but he clearly cared deeply about this man. We didn't hear clearly how deep the relationship went, Yvonne, but you could tell, you could infer that amongst the few number of people that Joel Guy cared about, this guy was one. They had gone to a prep school together in Louisiana. They had gone to college and roomed together, so they'd known each other roughly 10 years, I think. And then Mr. McCracken had moved. He worked in like vaccine research for the Army. He moved to Maryland. But he testified that Joel, even when they lived together, shared living space together, would sometimes go off by himself and sort of shutter himself from anybody else for long periods of time. But I will never forget, just as Yvonne just said, when McCracken was done testifying and they excused him from the witness stand, Joel Guy followed him all the way from coming down off the witness stand, leaving the courtroom. He followed his every movement all the way to when, that's the last time he saw him, I suppose, which was leaving the courtroom. And that clearly that's the only person I saw that he cared about. And I just wanted to add one more thing. He was definitely stoic. But Yvonne, I was going back, I couldn't see his face during opening statements, one, because my face was burrowed in my notes, and two, because we often had our backs to him. He was sitting in front of us. But I was going back and listening to the opening statement of the prosecutor, Leslie Nacios, who did a great job on this case. And she said something, and the camera happened to be, as I was going back and watching this, the camera happened to be on his face tight. And she made a mention that he concocted what she called a diabolical stew of human remains. Mm-hmm. And the minute she said that, it's like he really enjoyed that. His face sort of reacted in a positive, almost smiling way, and he kind of almost made a note to himself, oh, I like that, that's pretty good. And then he went back to his stoic reflection. And me going back in recent days and listening to that opening statement, I was like, wow, I never saw that before. That was interesting. That clearly, he liked that.
So in the process of this trial, you're hearing very strong statements, you're hearing testimony, you're seeing pictures. That had to be upsetting, as we've talked about, this whole covering of something this intense, this gruesome, makes an impact. So how do you recall how the jury was taking this in? Yvonne, do you recall? And I guess at this point, though, they are wearing masks as well, right?
That's a great question. John was in the courtroom. I never saw not one juror.
My bad. Right.
Because they couldn't show them on court TV, yeah. But John would know for sure.
Yeah, John. I need to make that distinction once again. Yvonne watching on a monitor outside of the courtroom, John, you in the courtroom.
Yeah. Well, and obviously that's one of the things that I always do in a case like this. I'm always trying to check out the jury. How are you receiving this? What are you thinking? I also try in a non-intrusive way to make eye contact with them, just to let them know I'm listening to all of this too. I didn't really pick up, that they had to be feeling things, because how often do you hear stories about a mom and a dad being attacked and viciously knifed 30, 40 times, and then having their son disrobe their bodies and pile their clothes up and cut off the dad's hands and drag the bodies to the master bathroom, where he then dismembers them and puts them in blue totes with chemicals. That's a lot. That's a lot. And then there was the testimony from the forensic examiner about what she found when it was her time she responded to the scene pretty much as soon as law enforcement got there and they realized what they had, because that's standard practice. And she gets to visually inspect what's in those totes and also then try to do autopsies on what's left of these two people. Their arms have been cut off. Joel Guy Jr. had cut off his father's legs at the hips, cut off his mom's legs, I believe, at the knee, cut off his mother's head, as I said. So you're looking for all of that. I couldn't really tell, though. I thought that they held it pretty well. I don't remember, to be honest, and Yvonne, I don't know if you remember. I don't remember, like, Judge having to say, let's stop here. We probably need 15, 20 minutes. It was pretty measured. And another thing is, today, in the 2020s, courts are more careful and mindful and deliberate about the kinds of photographs that jurors see. it used to be way more sort of Wild West in terms of what the jury would be exposed to in terms of photographic evidence from the crime scene. At least in Tennessee, they have tried to be more careful about not overdoing it and being judicious and discussing both the prosecution and the defense and the judge coming to an agreement about what are we going to show this jury. You can only imagine what potentially they could have seen. But in this case, for example, when they showed the blue totes, they often would black out the flesh that was in those totes. And by the way, I'm sorry, I have to say this just to be clear, we saw a picture of the cooking pot sitting on the stove, but we did not see what was inside. We were not shown that. Photographs were taken, but we did not see that. And we saw, about the closest we saw to graphic scenes was all of the blood that was on the upstairs landing where Joel Guy attacked his mother and murdered her. And then we saw, and Yvonne will remember this, we saw photographs from the workout room, which is in the back of the house, where Joel Guy attacked his dad. He did that first while his mother was out shopping. He did that first, and that was a very violent scene. And even without seeing a dead body or whatever, you could tell that was a very violent scene because the blinds had been messed up. There was blood all over the place. There was maybe later when the forensic testimony came in, we did see a photograph of one of Joel Guy Sr.'s hands because his son had cut his hands off and left them in the workout room deliberately.
Gruesome details,
Gruesome
even
details.
These many years later.
Pretty
But
grim.
once again, this is what plays out in a courtroom in cases like this. And this is what journalists and everyone in that courtroom must listen to for this trial to play out. Now, speaking of, Yvonne, how did the defense defend Joel Guy when this type of testimony and evidence is coming out? Do you recall?
Well, it was tough.
Yeah.
Honestly, the defense had a tough time because there was a lot of physical evidence at the scene. Even if there weren't, because there were carts and carts. John, I know you remember, they were wheeling carts of evidence into court every single day. It was that much. It was a lot to go through. But even if they didn't have that notebook was a golden nugget, as the prosecutors would have said. It was. It revealed almost everything. And so the defense did their best to deflect, to skirt around certain questions when it was time to question other witnesses. Joel Guy Jr. never took the stand at all. That was probably a good decision of theirs, that he did not speak about this. They did their best to deflect. And to kind of show in some ways that Joel Guy Jr. was isolated. I remember specifically in questioning for Michael, which was Joel Guy Jr.'s roommate for a couple of years while they were away at LSU. He questioned him to make sure, hey, how was his relationship with his mother, with his father? Did you ever meet Joel Guy Sr.? Was he pretty alone and aloof in his own world? I think in some ways they were trying to make it seem like maybe outside of his mother, he didn't really have someone in his world that cared for him. So in some ways it seemed like they were trying to draw sympathy toward Joel Guy Jr. It didn't work. For obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But yeah, they really did try their best to deflect. It was very interesting to me, and I think, John, especially since you were covering this for many, many years before I even came to the Knoxville area, is that there was not an insanity plea. I was very shocked that they took this to trial with the amount of evidence that they had, knowing what they were up against. This was going to be a really hard case for the defense to prove anyway.
Look, I mean, it was all planned. Joel Guy Jr. is not insane. He's a smart, thoughtful fellow. He's not the most sociable person. And I think I remember, as you were talking, Yvonne, I think I was remembering a conversation I had with one or both of the defense attorneys, who, by the way, have represented people for decades. They are both experienced, good lawyers, John Halstead and Mark Stevens. I think one of them said to me something to the effect of, "Don't you think we would have tried that if we thought it would have worked?" Right? I mean, they knew what they had, and they sort of game boarded out any possible way that they could help their client. And there was just so much, as Yvonne says, that what they were really trying to do, the jury didn't see this because it took place in the months and the years before the trial. Yvonne mentioned the notebook and the backpack. They really wanted to keep that out, because if they had been able to keep that out of the trial, then a lot of the state's proof on intent and deliberation and planning, they wouldn't have had that. It would have been more circumstantial. It would have been, well, Joel was there for the Thanksgiving weekend, but they couldn't necessarily have put him directly in the house. But you've got that backpack, which is his, and the notebook, which is his, and he lays it all out. And he lays out the motive, because he says that he'll kill his father, and then he will get $500,000 in life insurance that his mother has set aside for him as a beneficiary. And he says things like, "All mine, all mine."
So this plays out. Testimony, evidence plays out for days, and then there is a guilty verdict. Here is Yvonne again with that verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Joel Michael Guy, guilty of first-degree premeditated murder.
After almost 3 hours of deliberation, Joel Guy Jr. looked on with a blank stare as the verdict was read out loud, guilty of all 7 charges: first-degree murder, felony murder, and abuse of a corpse. Family members behind him sat quietly, holding back tears. But when it was their turn to speak,
And they loved him. They loved him so much. They loved all of us.
they shared their pain.
This has impacted my kids, and for that I will never be able to forgive.
They shared their grief for memories they'll never get a chance to make.
I was robbed of having my father walk me down the aisle. And Lisa, my last mother on earth, was taken away.
And they shared their gratitude.
Thank you to all law enforcement and the lawyers, the court, the jury, everyone that had to see all this. And I'm very sorry that this evil's had to come into their life too.
Judge Steve Sward sentenced Joel Guy Jr. to life in prison for the first-degree murder charges. Prosecutors want those sentences to run consecutively, which would mean Guy would have to serve at least 102 years.
Clearly, no one surprised in that courtroom, or probably beyond, by that guilty verdict. How long was the jury out to make that decision?
Not long, several hours, I think, Yvonne. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
Yeah,
it's
not very long. I mean,
it was very short.
Yeah, it seems like it was in the afternoon, because the trial basically went all of, I think, Monday through Friday.
Yeah. The family played a big part in this trial. They were willing and forthcoming to talk about their parents and their relationship and their horror and all this. Did you all develop relationships at all with the family members? And once again, recognizing this was during COVID and we had limited access, but did you all have the opportunity to talk one-on-one with the family members?
I'll answer first, and then Yvonne, you chime in. You know, it's always kind of tricky, because the first thing is you want to be very respectful to people who are the family in a situation like this and give them their space. I always try and do that. I do not try and do the hard sell, but I do try and show people I'm always there. I nod, I say hello, good morning, whatever is appropriate, or I just flat leave them alone. The Mr. Guy Sr. had 3 daughters from a prior marriage, and so the daughters were often there, and the daughters would sometimes bring the grandchildren there. So that's what you would see often in the front rows or near the front, sitting right behind Joel Guy Jr. And yes, we ended up being very cordial with them, and they were, for all that they had to listen to, and I'll be curious about your impressions, Yvonne, I was just really struck by how strong they were and how they were able to endure listening to all of that horrific information. One of the daughters remarked that even though Lisa Guy was not her biological mother, that she deeply admired Lisa for the love and the care that she gave the whole family. They loved their dad, but they also deeply respected Lisa because she was a great mom, dedicated. And there were also some other family members. Yvonne, I can't remember, did you and I end up talking? It was a member of Joel Guy Sr.'s family, I think from Hawkins County, who also would sometimes be there. Some of them were smokers, so you would see them out smoking on the deck in the city-county building. But did we talk to them? It seems like maybe we did.
We did. She was the only member that we were able to get on
That's
camera.
Right. That's right.
And that was the sister
That's right.
of Joel Guy Sr., who also testified under oath in court. And John is absolutely correct, especially in cases like this. You have to be very, very cautious that there will be times when people don't want to see you. They're just trying to make it through their day and get this over with the best that they can. But that family was so gracious in a moment where they didn't have to be, especially to media. They didn't have to speak to us. But they gave their time, even if it was just a little slight head nod or just a wave hello. They were very, very kind. And John, when it was all over with, many of them did shake our hands, members of the media that were outside watching the trial from the confidence monitors. They said thank you.
Yeah.
And
which is a lot more probably than I would have given.
Given.
Yes, absolutely, because they didn't have to thank us. We were just doing our jobs and we wanted to do it well. But that's how gracious and caring and really genuine that family really was, even during such an emotional and hard time.
Are there any lingering questions, any lingering feelings these many years later, 2026, that you still grapple with or you still have to contend with? Or is it one of those stories that, okay, I covered it, I shared it, I did my job, it's done?
Well, for me personally, again, I hope I never have to cover a case as gruesome as this, just simply because why? Human beings should not do these kinds of horrific things to each other, and I would just as soon not have to cover that again. But I also know, having covered crime in courts for more than 35 years, that these things do happen. I think the impression that I walked away with was that Joel Guy, in his small, beady, little selfish mind, did all of this. This was what he wanted. He planned it. In his mind, he was angry that anybody was going to cut him off, and so he was going to fix them. And so there's not any tragedy here. There's not any miscommunication or misunderstanding. This was a man who thought he knew better than anybody how he wanted to fix a problem that really was of his own making, in that he never worked for himself. He allowed himself to be completely reliant on his mother. And then when she said, hey, buddy, we're retiring, you're going to have to figure something else out, that was not okay with him. So I've always put this on his shoulders. I don't know about you, Yvonne, but I've always been like, you did all this, pal.
I agree. I do too. And I'm with you. I think the biggest thing for me is wondering why. Because, thank God, my mind doesn't work like Joel Guy Jr.'s mind worked. I still can't comprehend that you do all this for money to your own family For what? It doesn't make sense to me, and I'm grateful that it doesn't. But I also wonder, will he ever feel remorse? Will he wake up in jail one day and feel remorseful for what he did, feel sorry for it? Because it did not seem like he felt sorry at all during the trial. Those are the questions that I kind of think about, but I've really learned to give that over to God, honestly. My faith got me through this trial, and the judge spoke eloquently during the victim impact statements to the family after they got done expressing their grief and what this trial had done to them. He knew that the family was a family of faith. And the judge quoted Romans 5:20, that where sin did abound, grace did abound all the more. He quoted that in court. And it gave that family so much strength and so much grace. Because what that scripture really does say, and what it means, is that even though there are so many sinful actions in this world, there is nothing that God's grace can't help you through. And he said, I'm not your counselor. We're not friends. I am the judge. But I hope that your faith, that you use your faith as strength to get you through this next chapter. And I think about the family a lot. And I hope that the judge's words and that scripture rings true for them still. Because it did for me. And it encouraged me to continue to get through this trial and just how I live my life moving forward through grace.
Well, we will leave our discussion at that. Yvonne, John, thank you so much. Not a very hard case to talk about, to remember, but we appreciate you both walking us through that. If you would like to watch past episodes of Behind the Headline, you can reach out to our streaming app, WBIR Plus, to access them there. They are also available on Apple and Spotify. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you for the next episode of Behind the Headline.